is open. I think we should continue with the brainstorming, and Rui Tavares is first too.
Well, thank you very much. Three very interesting presentations. I only heard part of what Kim said, but I thought it was very interesting to bring Article 4, which is usually used by the Hungarian government because of the respect for the constitutional form of the member states part. But I have usually heard this article referred as also the article of sincere and loyal cooperation. We talked about the loyalty principle, but I would like to stress the sincerity part of the principle, because that's really a big part of what's at stake. In other debates about Hungary, I have used the metaphor of the forger of paintings, because I'm not a lawyer. I studied history of art, and sometimes the kind of approach that a voluntary degradation of the rule of law in a country takes is it's the approach of someone who is forging a lookalike of democracy, knows where are the red lines, knows where your state has to stay. I remember when the Commission decided that in order to compare judicial systems, we should have the judicial checklists. What was the name?
Yeah, it was the rule of law checklist, actually.
No.
Scoreboard.
A scoreboard.
Scoreboard.
Justice
Scoreboard.
Justice scoreboard. Yes, thank you.
And
right.
you know, of course, if you want to make yourself discreet, you will not be neither in the, for instance, in the lengthier. You will not hold high or low in the justice scoreboard. You will be right in the middle with not very lengthy procedures, not too quick procedures, because both of them will raise suspicions. So you will try to be right in the middle, or you will try to act in a way where you do what you have to do, but you don't raise too many suspicions. So what I'm saying is that you are acting insincerely. Of course, it's very difficult to prove insincerity, but I think it has to come to our intellectual toolbox when speaking about this, because it's part of mutual trust and then mutual recognition, and also the missing half of political will. People have political will if they are sincere about what they want to achieve. So I think it's interesting to explore more Article 4, because we've been going from Article 2 to Article 7, explore more Article 4, and there's also a very clear case that the reaction of a government, the Hungarian government in this case, to successive injunctions from the European Parliament, from the Commission, the way in which decisions are not implemented, etc., is just an insincere type of cooperation, i.e. non-cooperation with the Union, so it will be more explored. For Carlos, I don't know if the Copenhagen Commission will only have to act ex post. Our idea with the Copenhagen Commission, and I say our because many people have spoken about this, and Mueller, we spoke about this in our report, is to create the institution and then fill it in with content. It may be an institution that presses the alarm button when nobody else is pressing the alarm button, but it can also be an institution that produces authoritative reports on many aspects of rule of law in the Union, including by the institutions of the Union themselves. I would not see the Copenhagen Commission as only an organ that will be only focused on member states, but it will be focused on other instances of distancing from rule of law and democratic values in the Union. And well, Dimitri, it was a very interesting presentation. I think that maybe one day there will be a member state that will have both the sincerity and the political will to try that procedure. Let me just point one thing out. It's very difficult to use Article 7 in Parliament, not because of the treaties, but because of the rules of procedure of Parliament. Because according to the treaties, there is nothing that would forbid Parliament to use Article 7 as a simple majority decision. But then you go to the rules of procedure, and it is in the rules of procedure that you have to have the 2/3, meaning that almost every government that belongs to the SD or the EPP is safe from an Article 7 procedure coming from Parliament. If this government is expelled from both the EPP or the SD, then the possibilities arise because it's easier for you to have the two-thirds. It becomes possible. It was not in the last mandate, that's for sure. And of course, you cannot change the rules of procedure when you have a hot topic such as this one, because people will say that you're changing the rules of procedure because of Hungary or because of a member state. But I don't see any reason why this rule should be in the rules of procedure of Parliament. And in an occasion where there is, a political moment where you can go about it without raising any suspicions that you are going after a member state, it should be changed, because otherwise you will be protecting governments that come from the bigger political groups in Parliament, and you shouldn't do that. So you should, as the people say, with a simple majority of Parliament. Then you go to Council, and in Council you need 3/4 of Council, I believe. But that may be unachievable unless you have really turmoil in the streets and political prisoners. But at least you would have had a clear stance from the European Parliament with Article 7, and the political message would have passed through.
Thank you, Takis Papas. Lorenzo, I would like to ask a question later, so Takis, please go ahead.
Yes, just a very brief note. I like your presentations, but I took notice of Kim's proposal, which I found very interesting, very simple, very straightforward, and in a theoretical sense very fair, because democracies are about relations, checks and balances, and when there are violations, there must be penalties. This is the idea, and this is very straightforward. Now, what you say, however, is that you talk about monetary penalties, and those monetary penalties, as you yourself realize, affect very much society at the level of citizens, of simple citizens. And there's a problem there, and I would like you to reflect on that, because what you say is that when there are violations of EU institutions, there must be some monetary. You cut the funds, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, compare that to what's happening to Greece. I mean, the country does not comply to the demand for reforms, and there are monetary penalties. Now, what happens in those cases? So what might happen? What might happen, especially in societies where you have populist governments in power, is that those monetary penalties may trigger a frame by leaders of victimization of the people, and this might lead to Euroscepticism, and this might lead to outright hostility to the EU. And the question is, eventually, is the EU, the Commission, ready to take this risk?
Okay, Lorenzo, please.
Yeah, two points briefly. Kim, you began your presentation reminding us how we need to go beyond a piecemeal approach of looking at individual bits of legislation or legislative change in Hungary, and take instead a more holistic vision of the effect that the systemic nature of these changes has. Another way of saying that is that the problem is not just legal, but it's political, that there is a political construction in Hungary that is, as a political body, going against principles of fundamental rights or citizenship rights. And that is an important consideration for me when it comes to our discussions earlier this morning of, for example, distancing the Orbán regime from the European People's Party, and more generally building a culture in the institutions that is more sympathetic to the type of demands that have been made in the panel this afternoon. There are a couple of problems that we need to be aware that are present when one brings in the more political discussion on Hungary. And linking to what Papas was saying just now, the second party in Hungary at the moment is an even further right-wing party, namely Jobbik. There is a very clear danger for the implementation of the kinds of policies that we were advocating this afternoon, that putting the Orbán regime in a situation of direct attack on the part of the European authorities might risk, if anything, further reinforcing and eventually leading to power. Not an emancipatory progressive force in Hungary, but Jobbik. This is quite closely connected also to the discussion we were having earlier on corruption. I still stand by the chance that by the idea that if one wants to promote political change in Hungary, one has to go after them where the money is, and one really needs to make a big issue of the misuse of European funds and European taxpayers' money to set up a oligarchical system and a state capture, ultimately, in Hungary. However, the strongest anti-corruption voice at the moment in Hungary is again Jobbik. So there is quite a strong risk that going for a regime change, Al Capone style, by following the money, what you actually end up reinforcing is Jobbik. That should not stop us, of course, but it's a consideration that is clearly in the minds of some of the people that we would want to persuade to have a stronger take on Hungary. Then technically, I think all the proposals that the three interventions just now have advanced are quite precious, and I think we certainly would do well to recuperate most of them in the reports from these conferences and the work that our respective organizations are doing on this issue. And I think that they really hit some of the more concrete can-do legislative changes and tweaks and fine-tunings that would be implementable within current treaties and so on and so forth. I still want to stand by the idea that the type of more ambitious, but yet within the treaties, reform that the Tavares report advocated, or that the so-called democracy plan of the ALDE group is proposing, a Copenhagen-like commission with the distancing of the European Council and the European Commission from having a direct say over the sanctioning of member states, is something that we need to hold quite dearly. I don't think that ultimately only these tweaks will persuade a European Commission that has a clear difficulty in ostracizing member states to take too strong an action. It certainly will not convince the European Council, where a system based on mutual trust risks being paralyzed by this kind of hostilities between member states, and there you're basically putting the paralysis of European decision-making as the penalty for taking a stand on the civil liberties of the Hungarian people within the European Council. So I think something like that is still really worth being fought for, but, and I conclude with this, it is a battle. It is not something that will come out of the goodwill of the Commission. It certainly will not come out of the goodwill of the Council, which, if anything, will do everything in its power to try and block movements towards this direction. And what that means is that we need to build very powerful alliances between countries and between sectors of amongst those constituencies, those groups, who are on the losing end of the type of decisions that are being taken in member states when it comes to fundamental rights and civil liberties. That certainly includes Hungary, for all the discussions we've been having today. It also includes, for example, protesters in Spain, who, as of a month ago, can be fined up to 600,000 euros for going to protest in front of the Spanish parliament in Madrid. There is a whole cohort of violations, direct or indirect, obvious or less so, of fundamental and citizenship rights, that one needs to network together around a demand for a European mechanism for sanctioning not only deficits in budgets, but also deficits in civil liberties and in fundamental rights.
Okay, thank you. I have two questions, and then I would propose, because there are so many issues in the air, to reply. First of all, in the Tavares report, there were some recommendations. It was also addressed to the European Commission partly, and partly to the Hungarian government. Now, that's another story about how the Hungarian government reacted. But what would be your evaluation? What happened to these suggestions? And also, the Commission and the Council, you mentioned it, came out with their own proposals. So, whether it was a useful, how much far we are getting to a breakthrough, what would be our dream, you know, sooner or later, to find a good solution, or we are still there where we used to stay 2 years ago when the Tavares report was approved. My second question is that I've heard that in the current Commission, this is probably the opinion of Franz Timmermans, he would be very ready to do something legally or politically, but he needs sort of new cases. What we are talking about, what Kim you mentioned, this is an old story, 3-4 years ago, and the politics is changing very fast, and the Commission cannot start to deal with the old story once again. So, but in a current situation, Fidesz does not have a 2/3 majority, and it might happen that we will not have such clear breaches of European norms and regulations in legal terms because of lack of 2/3 majority than we used to have 2-3 years ago. So what happens if there are no new cases? Should we think that it's better if it's worse and then we will have something from the Commission, or it's simply over what we are talking about? Well, who would like to start? I would like to give you the floor to react to these comments first. Kim, please go ahead.
So, these are really good comments. Let me take them. So, one is I think you're absolutely right to say that insincerity and loyalty are both Article 4 principles. What shows the lack of sincerity is the systemic nature of the breach. Right? I mean, that it just is not a coincidence that these things happen together. And that's why I think it's so important to package this as a series of violations that could not be accidental. You know, you always infer intent not just from one action but a pattern. As for Article 259, and I wanted to, I've been really supporting Dimitri's proposal for this. So Article 259, just to repeat, means that any member state can bring a systemic action against Hungary, can bring any action against Hungary, right? And that what's happened in practice is that when that's happened before, and it has to go first to the Commission, and then the Commission has to issue a reasoned opinion, and the Commission can then either use this action from the member state to file its own case. It converts the 259 to a 258, which has happened in all the meritocratic cases. I'm just sort of repeating what Dimitri said. Or it can let the case go forward as an Article 259 case. So what that means, practically speaking, and I would love to get all of your views about, is there some member state that would go first? Right? Because if there's a member state, but I'm thinking, I mean, really, what is Denmark for, right? Or whatever, I mean, or the Netherlands. But I mean, there are countries that really have a lot at stake in this vision of the EU. And if we could get one state to start it, the Commission would be shamed into following. I think that's the idea here. Right? So one of the projects we might take on with people in the room is to think about, so what member state would be congenial to this? Okay, so a couple of things. In terms of generating hostility to Europe, I've heard this before. The EU is persistently more popular in Hungary than Fidesz. And if there were ever any doubt about the EU, about Hungary standing in the EU, I think the EU would win over any of that. I mean, some of my Hungarian friends are more pessimistic, but I just don't believe it. The EU matters too much to Hungary and Hungarians, including those who vote for Fidesz. And I think that every time you see it, every time the EU looks like it's going to sanction Hungary, there's the swing against the government. I mean, the government's popularity drops every time there's not the infringement action that, you know, when the Hungarian government refuses to tax homemade palinka with the same VAT. Okay, that doesn't get people excited. But these big sort of political ones, the country responds a lot to foreign criticism. And a lot in the right direction, which is to say the popularity of the government goes down and there starts to be more grousing about the government when it's attacked from the outside, justifiably, with things that people can see. So I don't believe that that's a possibility. The Jobbik challenge is exactly what Fidesz always says in these circles. This is why the EPP's defended them so long, because they say, you either have us or you have this far-right group. Now, I think what Frank Engel said this morning is absolutely right, that first of all, Fidesz works under the table with Jobbik. Eva Balog, some of you know the Hungarian Spectrum blog. If you don't, and you should really read it every day, it's really helpful. One of the things she did recently was to go line by line through the political program of Jobbik in 2010 and in 2014 and compare it to what Fidesz has done. And they've accomplished almost every single plank in the platform of Jobbik. Okay, so it's just a red herring to say that Jobbik, I mean, yes, Jobbik would be different than Fidesz, but not so different from Fidesz. We already have Jobbik essentially governing Hungary. And moreover, Jobbik is now working with Fidesz under the table. Some of you know that Fidesz lost its two-thirds majority in the parliament. It had 2 by-elections it lost, so now it can no longer vote with the two-thirds. But it turns out that almost all the two-thirds votes that are required for governing Hungary are so-called relative two-thirds majorities, which means you only need 2/3 of the MPs present to vote for something. So what that means, because Hungarians are very good at math, it's one of their many talents. One of the main reasons why I have to save Hungary is just for mathematics. Okay, so but one of the things that you can do is you can change the denominator as well as the numerator of the fraction, and this is what Fidesz has been doing. On the 2 occasions where they've had to pass 2/3 laws so far, Jobbik MPs have been missing, which changes the denominator of the fraction, and it means that Fidesz has enough votes to pass their laws. So they're already working together on things. So I think that this is one of the things I wish the EU would confront, is the fact that you've got functionally a coalition partner in Jobbik for certain, with Jobbik and Fidesz. Finally, on just, actually 2 last points, if I might. This is not just legal, it's political, I agree. It's also not just political, it's legal. And the EU has always been much better at law than politics. The EU was built out of law and legality. And I think that there are many of these issues that I think need to be seen as law, precisely so as not to be seen as political. One would hope that this law would be enforced regardless of who violated it. And I think one of the reasons why you want the Commission and the Court combination as part of the enforcement mechanism here is precisely to say that this is above politics, that this was really about legal commitments. Finally, what about the new cases? So first of all, one thing, I've been talking to a lot of people about the systemic infringement action, including a lot of people with a lot of litigation experience at the Court of Justice. And what I've been hearing from them is that the Court of Justice needs a package, like if the systemic infringement action thing is going to work, it needs not just the laws, but it needs the laws and then examples that the laws are having certain effects. So, for example, on this judicial independence infringement action that I mentioned, all the laws, you could still have independent judges with that structure. So what we need to find, and this is again, I'm asking for help for all those of you who know EU law and know Hungarian law, we need to find examples of cases where the judiciary has overtly ceased to be independent, okay, on a matter of EU law. Do I have time to give one example? Yeah. Because I'm looking for these. So here's one example. So some of you may remember there was a Slovakian driver who hit and killed a Hungarian child. Tragic case. And the Slovakian woman is brought before a court in the morning, and she's arraigned, and there's a small bail posted for her to go free. And then they're going to bring her back for the case. The Prime Minister's office starts screaming after this by saying, but a Hungarian child was killed by a foreigner. How did you let her go free? And the judge, the same judge, reopens the case and in the afternoon brings the woman back and sentences her to house arrest in Hungary on the theory that she will flee to Slovakia and therefore out of the reach of the court. Well, there's this thing called the European arrest warrant, right? As well as equality of treatment of citizens. You can't just put somebody, under house arrest where you wouldn't have put a Hungarian citizen just because they're from another EU member state. And the EU arrest warrant solves the problem of fleeing the jurisdiction. So here's a case where you have judgment in the morning, Prime Minister's office screaming, change judgment in the afternoon on a matter of EU law. What's happened to judicial independence? Okay, I need more cases like that. So the framework is in place. It's been in place. It's old news. What's the new news are the actual violations under the framework that show that this is not just our imagination, but it's real, that the judiciary lacks independence or anything else in this framework. So that would provide that. Those would provide the new cases.
Thank you. We should go in row, and so Carlos, please.
So thank you very much. Very briefly, there's 3 questions here. The first is Rui mentioned about the Copenhagen Commission and its major role. And I don't think that the important thing is the body, but I think it's very important to define beforehand the procedure. And it's something which is very vague about the proposal of the Copenhagen Commission. You said that this both a reporting but also a triggering body. And I think we are serious about the rule of law in the European Union. We have to predefine the procedure so that everybody knows what is this commission about. And in that respect, what was happening here is to have a permanent revision procedure that systematically looks at all countries in all circumstances. And that is because, I insist, it's not only the case of a specific, again, we are concentrating very much on the Hungarian case, but why the case of the long public demonstrations in Spain that, as Lorenzo said, find someone who is demonstrating in front of the Congress with a 4,000 euros fine, or makes that the demonstrator can risk to go to jail if he takes a picture of the policeman. And this comes because some brutality of policemen were recorded with cameras and then shown on TV. is that less deserving of scrutiny than, with all my respect, that some laws in other countries? Or take a case, even now, the recently implemented law on the electoral reform in Italy. I'm not suggesting at all that this is a breach of the... But I would like to discuss about what are the effects of having a law that gives an extra premium in terms of majority to the incumbent government that allows it to nominate the judges in certain instances by the Constitutional Court. I'm not saying that it's a breach. What I'm saying is that all cases deserves a kind of preliminary discussion rather than reacting to breaches only. I mean, we're in a situation in which reaction is what is needed, and I understand that it's driven the discussion, but if we think systemically what we need to do is something preemptive and something that works before the breaches happen. So that's my emphasis. Who is the body? I think is relevant, but I think it's very important is ex ante and a kind of permanent scrutiny system rather than incidental. Incidental systems, they have always an element of aleatority and arbitrarity and inequality there, because you can say always why you choose this case and not this other one. So there's an element there that we should take into account. And the second question that I wanted to pick very quickly is the question about sanctions that is raised, which I think in political science has been a long literature about sanctions, demonstrating that sanctions do not work. That's true. But it's difficult to think of any other kind of mechanism for enforcement and sanctions. So in the absence of alternatives, I would still prefer to have sanctions than to have anything else. And I think we shouldn't be, and with that I align totally with Kim, we shouldn't really be scared for the risk of delegitimation in the European Union because of imposing sanctions, because of just causes. If the causes are fair and just, I think sanctions are fully justified. And it's worse not to impose sanctions because of fearing the effects, the sideline effects, that rather imposing them. And finally, a reflection that is much triggered by the combination of what Rui and Lorenzo said about the political limitations. You spoke about political limitations in the European Parliament, and you spoke about political limitations in the... Sorry, that was in response. Political limitations, the difficulties of finding a government who really wants to trigger Article 259. And I think this is the crunch of the problem. We have political limitations not only in the Commission, we have that in the Parliament, and we have that in the Council. And it's perhaps the biggest barrier to make an effective working system to implement compliance with the rule. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the great comments about the sincerity components. I still remember my classes in Budapest in EU law. That's where I first came in contact with the law. Basically, it was Professor Akostot who was telling it's the duty to help and not to hinder. So in fact, if all the classical textbooks speak about the positive component of Article 4.3, what used to be 5, what used to be 10. So even if a member state doesn't actively help, you can theoretically invoke this article alongside others, which is particularly helpful in what we are speaking about. So it shouldn't be about the violation, it should be about probably not really assisting EU institutions or other member states in reaching the outcomes which are mandated by their key. So I think this is a great point. New cases. It's very difficult not to discriminate. Nobody mentioned the elephant in the room. There is a member state that seriously thinks about leaving the ECHR system. Thank you very much. So let's speak about let's speak about death penalty. Let's speak about all kinds of it. And then there is one member state that says we're not interested in your system of human rights protection. And then should we single out the UK or not as a potential horrible violator? This is an open question. Under your approach, certainly yes. Under my approach, probably not. And my approach is informed by a wonderful monograph that Wojciech Sadurski published in 2012. That basically claims that there are two main groups of countries in the EU in terms of their reasons for joining the ECHR system. Some of them simply want to polish up their quite functioning system of human rights protection. The UK will be in that camp. Others rely on the ECHR in order to avoid potential abuse and dismantlement of functioning liberal democracy in the future. That will be Bosnia, that will be Russia, that will be Turkey. ECHR is failing as much as the EU is failing.
So then, when Hungary has problems with the ECHR, it's quite a different case, to my mind, believing Sadursky and others, compared with the UK having problems with the ECHR, with all respect to the ECHR. So we have a single system of human rights protection for all the European states, but it is destined to work differently, and it serves absolutely different functions in different parts of Europe. This is something that we have to take into account. And then when we design a uniform system of human rights protection, this should be the fundamental consideration. We cannot simply pretend that the UK is the same as Hungary in terms of the threat of like imminent fall into an illiberal non-democracy. It's not true. So if the UK leaves the ECHR, it might be that nothing terrible will actually happen. They will have their own protection of human rights. It can be perfectly functional, just like the ECHRs. And then, which state? The Netherlands would be a great state. The Netherlands was against Greece when the colonials came to power. The Netherlands was against Turkey when there was a coup in '82. The Netherlands always supported direct actions against states, while others were saying, "Oh no, this is not what we do in international relations, etc., etc." And then Timmermans is from there, etc. And the Netherlands signed all those letters of 12 or 4, etc. So let's see what we can do.
Thank you.
Because 259 is the article for the stupid. It really has this fate, because all the cases on 259 are really utterly amusing cases. I teach them because the facts are always absurd, and the commission doesn't join for nothing. So there is this stigma. And once we actually, so in order to use Article 259 for real, you need to you need to change the frame of mind first. And in fact, it's quite a usable article.
Okay, we have only 6 minutes left, and we have 3-4 very short interventions at the end. Please, François.
Yes, thanks a lot, Isvan. I will be very short. Thanks to Mr. Tavares, thanks to the other speakers. I totally agree with you. I think we have to continue our struggle here and outside the parliament. Take the example of Italy. Some years ago, the situation of Italy was similar to Hungary, with a prime minister totally populist and corrupted, with a political party, Forza Italia in Italy, concentrating economic and political powers, and you can see the situation now. Of course, Mr. Berlusconi has had some judicial problems, but not only. The influence of the EU and of the open public opinion was totally crucial in Italy too. And so we have to continue our effort. I am speaking under the control of an Italian friend. Now the situation in Italy, of course, is totally different. And Mr. Berlusconi and his party, I think they obtained 10% of the vote. I hope it will be the same thing for Fidesz in some years.
Can I say something about that? The comparison with Italy.
Very shortly.
Okay. So actually the comparison with Italy doesn't work. Because Berlusconi tried, because there were enough forces within Italy still pushing back, even though they didn't win for a while. But Berlusconi tried to change the constitution and failed. He tried to pack the constitutional court and failed.
Orban too.
No, but Orban's already changed the constitution. He's already packed the constitutional court, and he's already infringed the independence of the judiciary. And those were the three things Berlusconi couldn't do. And so there was some basis for belief within the country that there was resistance.
Mr. Berlusconi tried to corrupt the judges. You don't know the situation in Italy, excuse me, but, I am speaking under the control of Giulia Massotti. And so there are a lot of common, excuse me.
But he didn't win everything like Orban. Okay.
All right. Well, certainly politically and legally the situation is not the same, I guess. But okay, please, very shortly, please. Yeah.
Yes, you are afraid when I take the floor. You are right.
Sure.
I think that one of the problems we face is that we don't have a nice story to put in front of the bad stories which happen in Europe. We have a downward situation. Things are going bad and worse in all European countries, almost all, in different forms. And that's why the kind of things which happen in Hungary can happen. And that's why they can last so long. If Hungary was isolated, it would be much easier for us to discuss in this room what to do. And it's because what is happening in Hungary is reflected in different ways in different countries for quite a long time now.
Yeah.
And it's not probably the end of the story that we are in such a mess to find fast and efficient solutions. And that's why first I support very much what you say about documenting the most we can, in the most country we can, the decisions and the facts which shows that the European values are not applied by authorities of the different countries. Second, to try to find loudspeaker to make this known everywhere in Europe by trade unions, by association movements, by political parties, by everyone. Not that everyone will be honest, but the sum of this has to have one goal, to raise awareness about what is happening. And then to have as many as possible proposals for action. I don't think that any of the proposals which has been done today will be implemented. Each of them can be challenged by arguments. That's not a problem. We have to create a climate which is that we are looking for action and solutions, even if they are not feasible. But the climate we have to raise in Europe is the fact that there is a bunch of people which is numerous, which want to stick to the European values, which want the government to stick, and which want reaction. We have to create this climate because the other climate, the downwards climate, is created every day and is increasing very much. We are probably the majority, but our voice is silenced. The minority is growing and is very much heard. This is probably the stage in which we are and to which we have to answer by all our democratic possible means. That's what I would suggest.
Thank you. Natasha, as a voice of the majority, please go ahead.
No, it's much more down to earth, and at the risk of sounding stupid, but you mentioned yourself the procedure of the stupid. Under this under this treaty line, what would the Netherlands or Denmark, let's say, what would be the case they will bring against Hungary? I mean, what would it be? Is it something we have thought about? Is it something we've asked the Commission to do and it hasn't done? Would it be something new? This is where this is a question I have. What would be the case they would bring against Hungary that would make a difference? That's my first question. And then with regard the ex ante, I mean, I hear what you're saying about the comparative law, the preventive, but I still don't see how will this be processed at the EU level after that. I mean, imagine that Commission, criticizes the Spanish law. We didn't mention the French law on security, which have all been passed, and through they say democracy and in the parliament, etc. What's next? Aren't we back to square one? Should Commission do infringement? Should it do rule of law? So where does that take us out of the problems we're facing now with enforcement? Thank you.
Very shortly, please, because we are already in the coffee break. Please go on. Very shortly.
Very short. Which case? We don't know what the court will actually accept, but we can always try to make a case for the violation of EU law, which is broader than the key understood right now under Article 259. So the case is very simple. The Netherlands tells the world and the court that since self-help is prohibited, reciprocity is prohibited, and it's obliged to trust whatever is coming our way from Hungary in terms of revolutionality, in terms of the goods that circulate freely at first entered Hungary, in terms of arrest warrants, anything. then we can simply not trust that, and we cannot do anything about this. So Article 2 violation can actually be coupled with a number of other provisions of the acquis, and then all that is poured on the court, and the Commission, of course, will not support because it's against Article 258 as it's understood right now. But the court will have to deal with this, and if the court says no, we cannot do anything, it's not within our power, but you cannot help yourself, so unfortunately you are stuck. That's when legal political thinking will start, because it will exemplify the fundamental problem that the European Union is facing: no self-help and no help from the EU.
Thank you. I know a country which might be ready to start this process. That would be Norway, which has a conflict with Hungary, but unfortunately,
has no
it's not possible. Yeah. Please, very shortly, Carlos.
Okay, very shortly to the question, what would be the effects of the ex-ante procedure? And I concluded my intervention saying that this won't be enough. Nothing that we have will be enough, because at the end, political will be always a factor, and we have come to the assessment that the three institutions that have political will. The ex-ante procedure fits into any of the other existing procedures. And in a way, I think it has got a very important property that was said before by Mr. Sule, which is it activates stakeholders. So you have a permanent scrutiny system, stakeholders, civil society actors, political actors, they might dig into this proceeding and try to activate further action there. So it enlarges the base of stakeholders that can take action. It doesn't mean really that we'll have effective results. That's something I really doubt, but I doubt it from any existing procedure nowadays. So the question is, it will add something. It won't resolve the situation. That's for sure.